Redditors that have had hallucinations. What is the strangest thing you have seen? I woke up in college to some frantic phone calls from my girlfriend. She was desperately trying to get a hold of me and asking if I was okay. Yeah, sure. I've been asleep. What's the concern? I got your email. Oh, yeah. What? I remember starting to write you, but I fell asleep before I finished it. No, you finished it. A doctor had prescribed me some Ambien to get some sleep. Took some the night before as my trial run and thought I'd shoot my girlfriend an email to say good night. This was pretexting. It starts normal and slowly warps, less so. A few sentences and I casually mention how the blinds look like a snake curled at the top of my window. A few sentences later I mention frustration because the snake keeps trying to distract me. A bit later and I am trying to convince the snake to talk to the pile of clothes on the floor if they are both so desperate for attention. I signed off. I got to go. Love you, but I wish everyone in my room would be quiet. How I had the wherewithal to actually press send. I have no idea. I saw Buddha in my fish tank and for some reason it made me really want a bowl of cereal. After staying up for 5 days straight on 60 milligrams Adderall XR per day, I was sitting in a class doing a midterm exam and all the eraser marks on the chalkboard started swirling all over the place and then they flowed up off the chalkboard and across the ceiling. And then I looked down and realized the chalkboard was actually a window into the front of a big supermarket. Looking down the line of registers, with nothing interesting happening at all. Just people checking out at the registers and coming in and out of the vestibule. I had to drive home after that. Probably the most unusual one was that time when I saw an entire bathroom wall covered in bugs, including ones completely exotic to my part of the world. They were mostly just chillin', but occasionally one would fly off the wall and disappear. Unlike many of my hallucinations and delusions, this one wasn't scary at all. It was actually pretty cool. I played too much Tetris one weekend, like 14 hours a day. And the following week I was literally seeing shapes of Tetris blocks on people's faces. A giant cone, point down, of Ray-Ban sunglasses, revolving slowly in my living room. This was years ago. Mainly boring ones went on mind-altering substances. But I discovered I get tactile hallucinations if I stay awake too long. 54 hours awake, sitting in class. I felt my shirt sleeve fall through my arm. Gonna sound weird, but was walking down the hallway to meet my boyfriend outside to have a smoke. It was pitch black and I heard a mixture of whispering and snickering. Pretty much ran to the backyard in fear. After a while, I am not fucking kidding, I could see Tony the fucking tiger beckoning me to go inside. This was shortly after I had choked on some Frosted Flakes. Tony wanted to kill me. Did I mention that I have PTSD along with auditory and visual hallucinations? And we were on acid? Saw a woman laying on a bed and a rainbow cowboy came into the room through a portal and stabbed her. He then proceeds to throw the knife to me and says, "You're getting blamed for this?" Yeehaw. Quote. Then leaves 10 tabs of LSD. Would do again. Edit. Added cowboy. Years ago, I had severe issues with insomnia due to multiple sources of severe stress. There's something about the kind of stress you get from situations you can't do anything about that really weighs on you. At least it does on me. I gradually got less and less sleep. By the end, I was going a week without sleep at a time. Slept only a few hours, like 4, and went another week without sleep. I was hallucinating all sorts of interesting things, but I somehow knew I was hallucinating for the most part. One time I snapped out of having had a nice verbal conversation with a childhood friend of mine, but actually I was typing gibberish to someone else in a chat client, while staring intently into a wall, thinking I was sitting face to face with this friend of mine. Once I hallucinated something I later recognized in Inception, when the city folded over on itself. I had not yet seen the movie, so that was interesting. Another time I hallucinated that the city was one of those game boards you tilt to roll a metal ball through a maze, with holes in it. Why no? I felt the ground move the way that board did, tilting around. Gravity felt like it was changing direction quite abruptly. Not upside down, but sloping. I had lots of weird hallucinations back then. So glad that's far behind me. I became a flowering plant once. I mean that absolutely literally. Salvia is one hell of a drug. A troll sitting on the countertop. I was trying to hit it with a toaster till my wife convinced me that it wasn't real. Also, a witch standing behind a curtain. I threw a baseball bat at her, breaking the window. Val.245. On LSD, I saw a fractal of myself through time, infinitely repeating, yet each instance slightly different. It was more like an extremely vivid daydream than a hallucination, though. Marilyn Manson in the basket which I vomited to. A line of large, pale elephants, each holding the tail of the elephant in front of it, crossing the highway a mile ahead. Pikachu on this machine at a factory I worked at that lifts you up to get stuff off of shelves. I immediately looked and it was just a red emergency button on a yellow plate. I find that more weird than the usual flashes of color. I was doing schoolwork at my friend's house yesterday and I saw a squirrel just chillin' in the middle of her room. I haven't had any for a few years. But my biggest worst was about 2 months ago. I don't really remember what I saw, but I remember it was something that had to do with a girl. From what I remember, this girl was really deformed somehow. Like I could see her body like a normal thing. It wasn't missing anything, but there was this outline of it that made it look like a larger suit of some kind was missing something. And that is what was really messed up. Like, it looked like the suit had mended with her body and created pieces that were larger and some smaller. Danny DeVito. Friend and I scored some acid at a concert in the 90s. I took mine, then saw him put his away. Was then told I couldn't let his girlfriend know 'cause he promised not to do it around her. So yeah, try to pretend you are not on acid. 14 hours of seeing all manner of crazy shit. Weirdest part was after the show back at my place watching Wayne's World. The walls in my room breathing and Wayne and GS Arth look like demons. And I am not supposed to say anything. If I am in a weird in-between state of being asleep and awake, sometimes I'll have audio hallucinations of things like doors closing, my parents calling for me, etc. I live alone, so I know it's in my head, but they are really convincing. I saw 3 bison walking down the railroad tracks. I was worried they'd get hit by a train. No one else saw them. I'd been awake almost 3 days and everything was super vividly colored. Like hyper-technicolor. But weirdly pixelated too. The bison threw me off. I live in Chicago. I saw a shadow crawling towards me, scariest the shit I ever seen. I've seen a vivid screen in front of my eyes. It was a violet rectangle made of horizontal lines. And where my eyes pointed at, it was moving. It was like somebody put a computer screen inside my head. It couldn't be looking more real than that. I still saw the room in the corners. But in front of my eyes, there it was. The screen. I stayed up for 4 days on security watch. Back to work. Back to watch. I mixed Monster, caffeine pills, Red Bull and 5 hours energy over a period of maybe 6 hours. Definitely wasn't enough time to spread these out because I saw the dancing elephants from Dumbo and pink reptiles crawling down the walls. The lizards went in the exit door and crawled out of the ceiling. All in maybe a few seconds. Some of my coworkers were in places they shouldn't be, and doubled. My heart almost beat out of my chest. walking outside after no sleep for almost a week and some pills. Looked up and saw that the sky turned purple and a bunch of stars came out even though it was 10 a.m. The leaves on a tree turned crispy and fell off like ash. I saw a guy over the road looking up at the sky, so I thought that this was normal to see. The guy then looks at me super fast and sinks into the floor, stood still with a creepy-ass smile, and turns into a puddle. I still have no explanation for that besides the sleep and pills. When I was geeking out my freshman year of college for my newfound love of architecture, I hallucinated everything around me in the cafeteria being white and black like sketches in a sketchbook. It lasted for like 2 seconds, then I felt sick. It was really weird and freaked me out. I haven't had anything happen like it since. I think it was caused by lack of sleep and this overflow of intense and profound information that I was experiencing. I thought I turned into a crab at Glastonbury Festival back in 2008. When I was a kid, I would frequently, at least once a week, be sleeping at my grandparents' house for one reason or another. There was this painting my grandmother had painted that was hanging in the room I slept in. It was of an oldish man with a white beard who looked like the captain of a ship or something. Every time I was going to sleep at night there, I would hear the painting talk to me about random shit. Like it was literally so random. It happened every time though. It freaked me out. I had a very high fever and was lying in bed. Guess I was about 14 at the time. Then I see a Native American man in traditional clothing standing in my bedroom. We look at each other, and I am not scared. And don't think of him as a hallucination. We just looked at each other and then he disappeared. I know it was the fever and medication, but if somehow I found out that he is from the other side or came to check on me or something, I would believe it. When I was 14, I suffered from the worst bout of flu I'd had in a while. The worst part of it all was the nighttime. Impossible to sleep. Every time I would close my eyes, I would essentially feel like I was dreaming but still conscious. For the next 5 days, every night I would only get an hour or two of sleep, and every time I closed my eyes I would see myself inside a massive crater in the ground surrounded by talking planes that were flying around me. Zero context for this, by the way. I've never even seen Disney's planes. The entire sky looked like the reflection of a pool on a side of building, and the music I was listening to made the sky dance like a visualizer to the beat. Incredible. In detox from fentanyl, hallucinations of demons leaving my body through my pores, being chained up and naked in some basement, being fentanyl and raped. Whispers in my ear, fentanyl and hot heavy breathing going down my neck and spine, giving me chills everywhere. Hardest fucking 5 days of my life. I had a TBI in a serious car wreck in '09, and had to be life-flighted between a couple of hospitals due to a lack of surgeons or something. When I was landing in the second hospital, I was barely stabilized, and when I was unloaded I kind of came to being awake. Across the helipad, a freeway could be seen a few hundred feet away. The vision was super short, but I swear I saw what looked like a man running at the pace of traffic, northbound, until he crested a rise. It still freaks me out knowing that it wasn't there, but it looked super convincing. I have bipolar disorder, and as a kid during my first episode 1 saw a variety of things. Shadow people, bugs crawling all over the floor, a face staring back at me when I looked in the mirror. I also had auditory stuff like hearing voices occasionally. Pretty scary shit. Used to see a doctor for headaches. He would give me a bolus of ketamine as a nerve block. One thing I remember was speaking to my wife's grandmother, who died 25 years before. When I told my mother-in-law, the clothing I described she was wearing was an exact match for what she was buried in. I have done more than my share of LSD and mushrooms. And only one time have I seen something that wasn't there. We were out in the woods. Pitch black night. No moon. Just totally dark. The shrooms were not agreeing with my belly, and I went off from the fire to deal with it. I start to heave, and this clown face appears. He was super multicolored, angular and geometric, like made out of fractals. I started to puke into his wide-open mouth. It was just his face with a huge, friendly smile, and each time I heaved, he would open up his mouth, as if to accept my vomit. It was actually quite comforting, and after a few minutes, I felt a whole lot better. Robert De Niro playing Russian roulette on a poster for The Deer Hunter pointed the gun at me. Really freaked me out because he was all red on a B&W background, playing guitar and watching the sound bubble out of my amp like lava. God, I love mushrooms. Once I saw some bugs. They were just black ant-looking dots. Not detailed or anything. There were just a few of them, sometimes in the corner of my eye. I think I was sleep-deprived. I've seen things watching me or coming at me angrily. Once I texted my GF that I saw her marching towards me with an angry expression on her face and she was very confused. A few times, while walking down a street that we used to park on, my friends and I had seen the same larger Hawaiian man. We were in Hawaii. Come out of a doorway, walk to the passenger side of the car, and start chatting with someone in the driver's seat. Head lean in, and the car and men were in the shadows. This was always during the night, and my friends and I would shuffle into a line to walk past them and not get too close. I parked there during the day, same spot, and realized that not only is there not a doorway, but that the area where we saw him walking to was not able to fit a full car. I had always assumed that the wall the man came from was the back door of a building for security or night entrance. There is no door in the wall, it's just a wall. I once saw a woman buttering toast in a neighboring building. I could see the crumbs falling off against the toaster as she pulled it out and could hear the scraping on the bread. There was no building. This was steer 4 hits of old school E. Maybe Molly. Not sure. It was a synth blend. Certainly not pure. I've seen very many, but the most common one I saw was a man wearing a trench coat and fedora. But one time I saw him playing foosball with another hallucination. I was on tramadol briefly, to help with sleep. That lasted about 3 days. I couldn't stand it. I had these out-of-the-world nightmares, and walked around raving. Somewhere in there I was playing bass in one of my favorite bands, but was having a huge fight with the lead guitarist, singer, and then sex. And he is married and straight. Drugs are bad, kids. After taking way too much DXM, I was staring down at my hand, just kinda examining it, when my thumbs started to slowly morph into a tiny man. I held the tiny man and he danced in my hand before vanishing. It was kinda fun. I also have hallucinations when I am not on drugs, but I am extremely stressed, upset and off my meds. One time I was walking late at night with my friend when I saw this man across the street just staring at us. He was bald and had a green sweater with red pants. Suddenly, he started slowly bending backwards like you see in those horror movies, until his spine was basically perpendicular to the ground and his legs were still standing straight. I started freaking out and yelling at my friend to look at him, but he told me nothing was there. Now I take my meds, lol. I have night terrors and hallucinations. Scariest are always people lurking and ready to pounce, but some of the strangest things I have seen are so normal that their normalcy is almost the most menacing thing about them. A pair of eyeglasses spinning in front of my face. A vase that I know we don't own sitting in the corner of the room plain as day. Seeing faces talking to me from the walls. That scene in Stranger Things where the demo whatever tries to come out of the wall freaked me out. I've seen that shit. The strangest thing about hallucinating is when you know you're hallucinating but you can't just will. yourself not to see what you're seeing. It's a really gross feeling. I've had some hallucinations on acid and shrooms too. The strangest one was when I was walking along at night in a totally deserted town. Small town in the north. Everything shuts down early in the winter, and these little frost-blasted marigolds in a community garden looked like tiny heads mounted on stakes. I mean, they didn't look like that, they were tiny heads mounted on stakes. It was something like a very disturbing Lilliputian killing field. I was more intrigued than afraid, because they were so small. While tripping on shrooms, I found a comfortable spot on the ground to lay in the forest with a clear view of the sky. The clouds started to take the shape of paintings of movie scenes that I loved. The most interesting one was the Black Gates from Lord of the Rings. After taking these 2 capsules that my friend referred to as weed enhancers, I am still not sure what they were. I found myself floating up through a canyon where I saw a flesh-colored cylinder with a nutcracker face and big feet. He started asking me weird questions like if I wanted to die with my socks on. For some reason, I felt like he had to be St. Peter, so I asked him if he was. He told me it didn't matter either way. I felt like I was dying, and he basically convinced me that if I was actually dying, then there was no point in worrying about it and I should just enjoy the experience. Needless to say, I never took those weed enhancers again. When I was younger, I stayed up until like 3 a.m. one day to 5 a.m. the next day. That night my chair, eggshell kind of chair, looked like a damn alligator opening and closing its mouth, and I was scared that it was gonna freaking eat me. Saw my new friend I had met a few weeks ago in a hostel in Colombia. I was trying to reach him, but he would always round a corner. I ended up walking outside, still following him. It was an early Monday morning in Cali. I finally caught up with him a few hundred meters down the street. Just when we were about to embrace each other in a hug and a good to see you again, he evaporated. I have bipolar disorder with psychotic features. Usually my only hallucinations are hearing whispering voices, which mostly just annoys me, but I once saw elves sitting in a tree. They were moving and talking to me, but because they were outside a window I couldn't hear them. Yay, really rational lol. Once on a Tussin trip I witnessed, in order, the following. Darth Vader entered my room and walked right up to me as I sat. The control panel on his chest in my face. As I looked up to his face to address him, he disappeared and in his place I saw RoboCop. From the shoulders up only. Made of Legos. So basically a floating bust. That proceeded to point a weapon in my face and pull the trigger. At which point it exploded into its constituent bricks and disappeared. This all appeared in stop motion like the theatrical Lego movies. But this predated them by nearly 15 years. Now looking at the ceiling, I can see a giant 2D Eric Cartman bouncing around on the flat surface like a screensaver, until he slips into the corner where the wall and the ceiling meet and disappears. Then, the ceiling disappeared. I can see the night sky beyond and it began to rain down hundreds of 3D. Like right out of the N64 game. Timmies and Jimmies. My dick being big all of a sudden. When I was in primary school, nearly the whole class, 30 out of 32 kids, caught glandular fever. I woke up in the middle of the night with a high temperature, seeing multicolored frogs jumping around the room. Years later my mom told me that most of the moms said their kids also hallucinated animals. Each kid hallucinated different animals. I've gotten both hypnopompic hallucinations, seeing things while half awake, and psychedelic hallucinations. The hypnopompic ones are usually bugs, although I once woke up and saw, clear as day, a strange man standing over me in bed and leering. Gave me a good scare for sure. Psychedelic stuff varies a lot. With acid and shrooms, it's usually more distortions of things that are there and not seeing things that aren't. Although my brain once did interpret every black speck or shadow in my field of vision as ants. Apparently I've got a thing with bugs. DMT hallucinations would probably be the strangest, but also the hardest to describe. Think all-encompassing sentient rainbow fractal void. No bugs though. Chill. My roommate had an inflatable moose head, like a fake hunting trophy. It came alive. Its eyes started glowing red, and it flew off the wall and tried to gnaw my face off. I took some LSD, and while listening to Pink Floyd I closed my eyes and I could imagine the band playing live in my head, but they were drawn in multiple color cartoons. I remember there was this one time I was beating the donglong. Spent a night listening to Boomerang Balance of the Force on acid. The samurai dreams I had during those 6 hours were insane. I work in an old building full of chambers and narrow passageways, but several times now I've seen shadow figures out of the corner of my eye, or just a flash of them going into doorways, but I've noticed it a lot more recently, and each time it makes me jump and do a double take. It may not be what you're after answer-wise, but it's very strange just to have it happen. We joke about ghosts and stuff at work, but we never take it seriously. I saw the Grim Reaper, which was terrifying as I was suicidal at the time. Just fun stuff like the carpet fibers dancing rhythmically or rainbow swirls in my eyes in a mirror. I've never been fully convinced of a true hallucination. That time I ate 3 tabs of acid and went to the casino in Laughlin, Nev. I thought I got bad stuff until I seen this midget with a fanny pack on and a red-haired lady with a beehive hairdo up to the clouds walk by. Then holy fuck balls, all the lights and bells started going off like a bomb. Those tabs hit me like a truck. Woo-wee. Long story, but I was smoking in a totaled car. Not smashed, just no engine, behind a chain store apartment with some friends. This was probably our 5th smoking in this car, so everything was calm. Where I was sitting in the car, passenger side, there was a little gasoline tank with like half a cup worth in it. All of a sudden the garbage truck pulls and we all dip down cause we got shook and we still got half a blunt, so Maud's still trying to smoke, you know what I am saying. Anyway, when I dipped down I kicked the gasoline tank open and it spilled on its side. It really wasn't a big deal, but these guys were taking like 10 minutes to throw out all the trash. Cause there's like 2 delis and 2 apartments worth of garbage in the back. Then everything I was looking at started to be highlighted by these yellow lines. And then all of a sudden these monkeys holding each other's tails started walking across the yellow power line. The garbage truck left and I got the hell out of that car. The gasoline high went away in seconds, if not a minute. But that day was scary but also lots of fun. Edit. TL. Doctor. Got high off gasoline. Everything was highlighted with yellow and I saw monkeys. Just spiders really. That's it. Visual ones anyway. I've seen my arms and hands. The room go different shapes and sizes. I've had clicking, tapping sounds for auditory hallucinations and a feeling like when you press your first finger and thumb against a solid object for tactile ones. Hallucinations. I once saw my EXS bookcase turn into giant worms. I was awake for about 3 to 4 days straight and didn't have a whole lot to eat during that. I was trying to force myself to sleep after eating a nice dinner, and when I walked into my room I heard a voice coming from my chair and saw something resembling a shadow on my bed. The voice was barely recognizable as it sounded like a gurgle more than a person speaking. The shadow started moving towards me and it reached out its hand to grab my shoulder. It became my shadow at that point, and all I remember is looking back up from the ground and all the colors in my room were different. Not hugely different, like red turned to blue. More like everything was less saturated and dull. I just walked over to my bed and passed out finally. Although scared and confused out of my mind, everything fixed itself when I woke up from apparently 19 hours of sleep. Most nights I hallucinate. Recently I saw a large fly trying to crawl up the bed to me. I just roll over and nearly push my boyfriend out of bed in the process. Also jumped out of bed one night thinking there was a spider trying to get me. I have hallucinations every now and then. But the weirdest shit I've seen was a snail switch species. That thing went from snail to cheetah and I was there to experience the change. I smoked some salvia when it was still legal. Don't try it. The best way I can describe it was I had gone through a screen door and was now a detergent bottle on a conveyor belt in a factory. If that's not strange enough for you, can you wrap your brain around what it'd feel like to become a detergent bottle? It's definitely strange. Random voids. Shallow puddle. Nah, that's an endless abyss. Shiny button. Clearly light is being bent around an infinitely dense singularity. Not even limited to dark stuff. Somehow my brain twists a bunch of logic to explain it. Colors melting, bleeding. I am not sure how to describe this, but it's very unsettling. It's like eyes running or swirling. Makes it difficult to focus on certain objects. I didn't had hallucinations in the common term, but I do have hypnopompic hallucinations. Hallucination when waking up. Sometimes. The strangest was the scream of my stepmother, shouting about why I didn't wake up, in a tone that made me feel like she was gonna kill me. That was very scary, and waking up with this is a pain. I don't remember having any good hallucination of this type, whether it's my dad staring at me when I wake up or arguments between members of my family. None of them were good. An almost clown thing that was terrifyingly skinny, 4 to 5 meters tall and with skin that looked like dried lava. Edited to add. Content note for needles. I am phobic too, which is why this was a bad time for me. I spent a week with a catheter in my arm. Both arms. Changed halfway through the week for IV antibiotic treatment and, although I was at home rather than a hospital inpatient, my sleep was affected so badly that I started having hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations. The partially transparent white Chinese dragon rippling through my bedroom in the dark was cool. And the 2 ghostly WWII-era nurses bending over my bed didn't trouble me much as they seemed genuinely concerned for my well-being. The thing that did fuck me up a bit was when I woke up, glanced over to my bandaged arm hanging off the bed and saw a dark stream of blood running down my forearm and pooling in the palm of my hand. I'd clearly dislodged the catheter in my sleep. Torn it out. They were going to have to put it back in the next day. I threw the light on. Looked back to my hand. Nothing. Spotless. Never happened. That was the very last day I ever trusted the evidence of my own eyes. It's the ones you hear that are strangest. I was in a church camp in service and we were all praising the Lord, but I was so tired I thought I was at home multiple times. I have absolutely no recollection of this, but titrating onto Wellbutrin was an awful experience. I've heard others equate the experience to crystal meth. You don't eat, you don't sleep, you have sweats, and abdominal cramping. On my 3rd or 4th day of no sleep, my husband found me in the living room having full-blown conversation. He asked me who I was talking to. I said our neighbor. Don't be rude and come say hello. He then asked me what time I thought it was. I said Sunday afternoon. It was 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. My husband ended up calling the 24-hour nurse line, who told him to have me take a whole Ativan, usually 0.5 knocks me out, and sleep for as long as I needed. I haven't slept in probably a week. I stay alive by taking naps in between classes, and I was walking out to get some water. Then I just saw this weird dog-cat-wolf hybrid walk in front of me going to my back door. I was confused, but I let it live. Sleep paralysis demons are the worst. If you haven't experienced it, it feels like someone is sitting on your chest and holding you down. You also can't scream. Worst was probably my mother, in her work uniform, standing over my bed with a pillow to suffocate me. Last night, in between being asleep and awake, I saw a book with hair like tendrils coming out. I reached out to touch it and I swear I felt it. They are extremely rare for me and mostly from stressed and sleep-deprived youth. But I do see ghosts of living people. The most memorable was of my still alive dad. I was up late reading and looked up to see him standing in the center of M bedroom. He ominously intoned in a wavery ghost-like voice, "It's your BT me snack rotis," and striding across the room perpendicular to me and then ducked behind some cardboard boxes of clothes. I waited for him to appear, eventually calling out, "Dad?" in nervousness. Consciously realized there was nobody here and the boxes were too small to hide behind. THRN immediately turned off my light and tried to sleep so I didn't piss off what was clearly ghost dad. I've also seen ghost imprints of my all alive sisters. I didn't like walking down the second hall to the parents' bedroom because I saw a ghost of my eldest there and she silently strode towards me. Too unsettling. They also had a tendency to appear in impossible spaces, e.g. between furniture and the walls, and stare. If they weren't of real living people, I would 150% believe in ghosts just because of their vivid nature. Each episode didn't really have a clear end so much as in disorientation. I would realize it had already ended, like a waking dream. Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and Patrick coming out of snake slugs' rotten eggs. *Redditors. I don't exactly hallucinate, but I have hypnagogia, which means I have dreams that continue after I am awake. It's not sleep paralysis, so I often get up and try to interact with whatever I see. I've been attacked by robot arms, vampires, zombies, and the scariest was a giant ball of energy that I knew if it touched me, I would instantly die. I bolted and ended up bloodying my knee on the tub. 2 tabs of Ast and my best friend became an antelope. I tried to overdose on my antidepressants. Ironic, I know, and part of that process is extreme hallucinations. I kid you not when I say they were as real as day, except that I could control them as if I had some sort of mental telepathy with them. I could conjure things, but being in the messed up state I was, brain signals firing all over the place. All I could think of was a floating television to watch Popeye reruns on. That and the floating robot thing from the first Halo game. He played sports reruns and audibly spoke my thoughts back to me so I could better focus on them. First time trying LSD with friends. I took my dose, but I decided to combine with alcohol and stuff. I began tripping everything is standard until my mind decides to get paranoid. I spent the whole trip thinking my life was a lie. Everyone was an imposter, actor, paid to be in my fake life. It was a literal Truman's Show. After 2 to 3 hours that felt like an eternity, the host of my trip told me my play was over. I stood up and began clapping furiously. All my friends just stand there in the living room watching me clap and say repeatedly, "Best play ever." Everything was a play. As a kid, I was visiting family a few states away, and over a few days my cousin tried to teach me to play Magic: The Gathering, and then we went to the state fair for an afternoon. Some combination of rides and junk food made me woozy, and I went to bed feeling a bit nauseous. A thunderstorm woke me up in the middle of the night, and I saw MTG monsters coming in the windows between lightning strikes. I was chilling in the woods, staring up at the moon as it rose, and then the moon was gone. blinked out of existence, had never been there. The moon was a lie. The moon had been taken by the government. The world had ended in that moment. Was I dead? I looked down at this pond I was sitting near and the moon's reflection was there. What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck? And I looked back up and the moon was right where it had been. I cried a lot and went home. I should note that my hallucinations were self-induced via LSD. While tripping with a friend of mine, we were staring into a large mirror, standing side by side. At some point he turns and faces me to say something, but I didn't hear a word, because when he turned, his reflection only turned its head and stared at me with an ear-to-ear grin. Finally, after staring in awe for a little while, my friend gets my attention, and when I look at him, his face turns into a skull with little red dots where the eye sockets are. Still had hair and ears and normal skin on his neck. Just the face. I should have been freaked out, but I knew it was just the monster amount of LSD I took, so I was just mesmerized the whole way through. When I was in elementary school, I had to take a certain medication for something I don't even remember at this point. Well, anyway, whatever dosage the doctor gave me was well too high, and I ended up seeing these horseshoe-shaped cuts on my hands and believing that I had an allergy to wood pencils, and refused to use one for years after. I was in the hospital for alcohol poisoning, back of the head concussion from falling on a bed table, and had to stay for 48 hours in a single room. Was allowed to leave, had to be checked every 2 hours so I wouldn't slip in a coma. About 30 hours in, I started having severe panic attacks, so they gave me some anti-anxiety medication. Before I knew it, I started seeing strange shadows underneath the curtains of the bed in the light of the hallway, but there was nobody there when I looked. Then I started hearing voices, as if someone was talking to someone else. It was a doctor talking to an imaginary patient in the very bed I was laying in. This continued as I heard patients, doctors, and nurses talking, all invisible to the eye, but not to the ears. The shadows would coincide with the amount of voices. It felt like the room had become some sort of haunted area, in the sense that all time was lost, and things were folded onto my own reality in this somewhat subtle yet disturbing way. I never told the nurses about the shadows and the voices. I wanted to get out of there as soon as I could. The next day, after finally being allowed to sleep, everything was back to normal. Walking down a dark staircase, and all the steps, banisters and walls were covered in strange markings and patterns. Imagine those hypnosis spirals. From a young age, I also kept seeing the ground moving like a river or quicksand. I had a voice tell me that all the food was poisonous and that I should watch out. But they never told me about what I should watch out for. My story seems a lot more innocent, humorous than pretty much everyone else's here. After I had my wisdom teeth out, they gave me some serious painkillers. I don't know what they were, but I hallucinated tigers. They were about 8 inches long and all over everything in the house, just doing their tiny tiger thing. I recall sitting there, trying to eat my mashed carrot, and just going, well, that ain't real. When I get really tired, I have sort of auditory hallucinations. I don't hear actual sentences, just random words from different voices. Nothing that makes sense. It isn't creepy to me at all. And it is sort of my body's way of screaming, it's time for sleep. Had the flu in high school and was home listening to the Aladdin soundtrack. All of a sudden, Aladdin and Jasmine were in my room on their carpet, floating around. I used to lucid dream a lot as a teen due to poor sleeping habits and PTSD-related stress. Sometimes I would see people's silhouettes all over my room. Apparently a fairly common phenomenon. The Wedo. I took a ton of acid while already sick and landed in the hospital. While I was sitting there in the ICU, death walks up, stands beside me and I suddenly relive the last couple years of my life, starting from my first trip. But it's all warped and strange. Which I mean, yeah, acid. When we get back to the present, 20 years ago, he turns to me and informs me all of that time was just a dream. This is still the first time I dropped, and it killed me. The weird part is I felt super relieved. We just sat there in silence for a while. At some point he disappeared and I went back to alternating between throwing up and trying to convince the nurse on duty to close my curtain. I had an auditory hallucination. After a long period with a terrible sleep cycle, full-time night shift, part-time day job, and college, I fell asleep and woke up to a horrifying sound. Imagine a grown man tearing apart his room, throwing his TV and furniture while screaming incoherently. That's what it sounded like, and it was coming from across the house. We had someone in the house with disabilities. I thought he was throwing a tantrum. I ran to his room and he was asleep. I went, "What was that? What's going on?" My voice sounded very slow and deep, like when you're trying to talk in the middle of a big yawn. He woke up, looked at me for a second, and went back to sleep. Nothing in his room or anywhere the noise came from was out of order. I reorganized my life so I could have a better sleep schedule after that. I had severe insomnia during college. One day walking back from class, one saw a naked baby fishing with a wooden stick in a little muddy pond. Next to it was a bucket full of dead goldfishes. The longer I kept my eyes open between blinks, the faster things would change color. One time during the early 2000s designer drug craze, I took some and saw what looked like an all-original DBZ-type anime being projected on the side of my friend's house. I watched the anime my mind produced for a solid 30 seconds before it disappeared. I wanna suck your toes and give him a little sniff. While on acid, I decided to go drive my truck around, because I became convinced that the roads were rubber and my tires were concrete. I had an old pickup with a 4-speed, so driving it around took up so much sensory input that it was actually a blast to do while tripping. That was such a good acid trip. I felt like I had completed something psychically. Came away very centered. Of course your mileage may vary. I am not endorsing driving on acid.